welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film. We explore its themes, the history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Roque. I'm a writer, producer, and host here in San Diego, California, and massive Stephen Sondheim fan, and very excited, Steve, to talk about him and to talk about him with our two incredible guests.
You know, we do this whenever we lose a great artist,
Yes.
and Sondheim certainly qualifies as a great artist. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, John, it's just been you and me.
Yes.
But frankly, I couldn't imagine talking about Stephen Sondheim without talking about two of my favorite guests we've ever had on the Cine-Files, and people that it is a damn crime we haven't had back. And that's entirely, like, we talked about it over and over again. You should have been back long before this. David Cornue and Milena Govich. David is a composer and a writer. He just finished doing a pilot directed by John Chu, who did Crazy Rich Asians and In the Heights. And David wrote a pilot that was a big, huge production on ABC for it. He's also a composer. Milena, the list of things that I can say about her career: actor, Broadway actress, musician, director, and currently a director of television, working on shows like The Equalizer, Chicago Med, FBI Most Wanted. David, Milena, welcome back to the Cine-Files.
Thank you for having us.
I just want to jump right in with, particularly with your guys' expertise. I'm curious, how did you come to Stephen Sondheim? What's the first moment that you can remember being conscious of this person, Stephen Sondheim?
That's a great question. I can almost say that my introduction to him was probably pre-conscious.
Wow.
Because I am the fortunate child of 2 music professors. My parents both taught opera and musical theater singing in universities. They also had private voice students. So I grew up with voice lessons in my living room every day of my life. And for any of their light opera or musical theater students, the Sondheim canon was a staple. So I was hearing it from the time I have memory, basically.
David, how about you?
Well, mine is similar, that there's a pre-conscious part of it. I first knew about Sondheim when I was maybe 7, and I heard the West Side Story record that we kept in an ice box in our home, which I would take out and put on the record player and just listen to it over and over again. But I didn't really know Sondheim. I just knew West Side Story. When I went to college, I was actually a bit of a musical theater late bloomer. I went to college, and that's when I really started to discover musicals. That was the deep dive into Sondheim, where I would pull his scores out of the music library and just analyze page after page of sheer brilliance.
John, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I think a little bit similar to David. I knew West Side Story because as a Latino growing up, this was a film that my parents, who are immigrants to this country, Latino immigrants to this country, loved because of how it highlighted the Latino experience, the immigrant Latino experience in this country. So whenever it came on, I would listen to it. We had the record and I listened to it, but I did not know that it was Sondheim, right? To me, it was just a musical and my parents played it and I liked the songs. It wasn't until I was a teenager and then a little bit older where I discovered that it was Sondheim. Then I wasn't a musical theater person that much. And it wasn't until Michael Vogel, who has been a guest of ours many times, played me the Into the Woods soundtrack when I was in college with him at Florida State University. And I would go over to his house and his apartment purposefully so I could sit there for an hour and keep listening to the CD of that. And that was my entry point into Sondheim. My mind had been opened up to the possibility of a new form of musical theater, this kind of approach to speaking about your feelings and emotions in a way that it wasn't necessarily grandiose. It was more kind of nuts and bolts and really in the gut. And I felt that through his lyrics and through his words. And that turned me around. And Into the Woods is a transition time, coming out of the military into Florida State to pursue being an actor. So that just really spoke to me. And then I saw Sweeney Todd, and that was it. I mean, Sweeney Todd was the one that solidified, and I went and consumed everything Sondheim after that and have thoroughly loved him ever since.
So for me, this is a story that I never thought I would have the chance to tell on the Cine-Files. John, like you and David, I'd heard some West Side Story. I don't think I actually watched West Side Story until later, but something I have mentioned on the show before is that when I was a kid, my parents got season tickets to the local, to the national tours of the big musical shows. And this is like 1979, 1980. And at that time, I saw Yul Brynner in The King and I saw Richard Burton in Camelot.
Nice.
I saw Rex Harrison in My Fair Lady. This is, this was the last of their big tour. And the other show I saw at the age of 11 years old was Sweeney Todd with the original, with Len Cariou and Angela Lansbury.
Holy moly.
Lucky dog.
My parents took me. They didn't know what the show was. Wow. I was 11. Their description of me was that the show ended and I was pale white. And they were really worried. And I was like, that was the greatest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And I can remember going to Del Mar School, junior high, and telling everyone who had listened about this amazing thing that I had seen. I didn't know the name Stephen Sondheim. I didn't know anything other than that. I had been watching My Fair Lady and Camelot and all these other things. And then Sweeney Todd comes along. And I swear to God, it's now 42 years ago. I can picture that set. I can picture moments of the show absolutely perfectly.
Yeah. If we can redo the Beatles Let It Be documentary and really kind of make it come to life in 4K, can we go and do that for the Sweeney Todd, for Sunday in the Park with George, with all these filmed productions that are only available in 4x3 VHS? Can we hire people to go and do this? I would love to see those original versions.
Producers, are you hearing John right now? That is a great idea. Please do that.
Please.
I love it. So here's my question. We're doing an intro for West Side Story, obviously one of the great musicals of all time, and there are a whole bunch of great artists that worked on it. But why are we talking about Sondheim? Why was he important? What did he mean to the world of musical theater, and what did he mean as an artist?
Well, his work was groundbreaking in so many ways. I can tell from a more personal standpoint, as a singer and as a Broadway actor and performer who's had the pleasure of performing some of his work, the marriage between music and lyrics is so organic and so poignant and so insightful that it resonates in a way unlike anything else. In our musical world, we call it prosody, the way the lyrics fall within a melody, the way certain words land on certain notes or within certain phrases. He had such a beautiful marriage of those things. And as a performer, when some of the first Sondheim songs I ever sang, because of that marriage of music and lyrics, they became so much more actable. Mm-hmm. So the moment of the music, the moment that's being musicalized, I mean, we all know musical theater, the people bust out in song because they can't not sing, right? That's the hope. It's when that moment comes where the character has to sing, it's easy to bridge the gap between dialogue and song because it all flows together. It all comes as one. And not only is it joyous for the performer to do that, the audience experiences it in that way as well. And so a lot of Sondheim, like Sweeney Todd or A Little Night Music, there's so much through sung elements. You're moving in and out of song, and it's not necessarily like your traditional musical theater show where, yes, now the song's over and everybody claps for 2 minutes and now we go into the next thing. There's a lot more in and out, which gives a very organic flow to the entire experience.
And in fact, that sort of flow that he does on stage is cinematic in nature, and I think that's part of what's so beautiful about Sondheim, the fluidity of his scores, how he comes in and out of the song. And people who are fans of the Cine-Files, we're all fans of great storytelling. Sondheim was a fantastic storyteller, and it transcends the medium. I think that, he did reinvent musical theater, but I mean, I write mostly TV and film scripts now, coming from a classical music background and being a trained composer. But I still constantly think about Sondheim in how I approach my own material. He had 4 philosophies, 4 guiding principles when it came to writing music and lyrics. It was content dictates form, less is more, God is in the details, and all in the service of clarity. And I think about those principles all the time. And when you look at any great story, they abide by those principles as well.
I've never heard that before, David. That is just so great. John, what can you tell me about, your relationship to Sondheim and how you feel that he changed musical theater?
Look, I can't sing like Milena can sing. I can't compose like David can compose. I'm just a fan. And I'm a son of immigrants, army guy, and just at times a knuckle dragger. But I know that musical theater and the creative element within me could not find, past the MGM musicals. I really didn't go into musical theater, right? Anything Goes, the Cole Porter stuff, all that stuff. It was okay, it was fine. But it wasn't until Sondheim, and as David points out, the stories within the songs. Company is, I think, now my #1 musical for Sondheim. I just bought the Criterion the other day of the documentary of the original cast with Dean Jones and all of them. But hearing Elaine Stritch do Here's to the Ladies Who Lunch and her version of it, she is fully entrenched in this scenario and cinematic world, as David pointed, that she's creating within the song. And she's telling you so much. And you compare that to Joanna Gleason, Into the Woods, when she's talking about the prince. And then she meets the prince and has that dance with the prince. And he goes, and once the prince leaves her, the giant. And he leaves. And she goes, what was that? And she has this whole conversation with herself that feels so authentic and real. And it gives you a whole new perspective into 2 different women at different parts of their lives and what they're talking about. And as a dude, I'm understanding a woman's point of view so well through watching these songs. And so for me, it was about more than just telling the story. It was also talking about the human condition of a man and a woman as they're negotiating what they're negotiating within his musicals. And nothing, Being Alive, I sing Being Alive at the top of my lungs in my car, the Rula Esparza version all the time. When I'm by myself, by the way, I don't put my girlfriend through that. Like, there is so much in that song about being afraid to love. And then by the end, he is so desperate to embrace it. How many of us are so afraid to love because we're afraid to get hurt or because we don't want to go out on that limb and have it be sawed out from under us? And he captured that all in the journey of the song. And that's why I love Sondheim so much. And I think only Jason Robert Brown, for me, has ever come close to matching what Sondheim can do in his lyrics. And I say that as, kind of I'm a musical theater person, but not like a knowledgeable musical theater person. So if I've offended anybody, I just want to make that clear. That's the limits of my knowledge.
So for me, there's so much there that you can dig into. It's like if you listen to a classical musical theater song, and they're great songs. You listen to, a song from My Fair Lady or Oklahoma or one of these shows. Pretty much from the first verse, you know what the song is telling you. Right. And then the subsequent verses and choruses are going to reinforce, I am in love with this person. I want to have this. Whereas Sondheim, every time you listen to it, you go, oh, there's more going on. Oh, there's a journey. Oh, they're not trying not to express this emotion, and this other thing is coming out, and then they're resisting that, and they're surprised that this, and there's all this actor beat work that's going on, and I could listen to Company, I could listen to Sunday over and over and over again, and every time I hear a new thing that I didn't think of before.
Yeah, that portrayal it's on the money.
And it's so interesting that, his mentor, at least from the lyricist standpoint, was Oscar Hammerstein, who is known for the kind of musical you're describing, Steve, where, and often in the early days when Sondheim was still kind of making his way, he would put that aside, say the Hammerstein, it's the old school way of doing things. I don't really want to do it. But it's interesting. My friend, he's one of my dearest friends, Sam Holtzapfel, who's an extraordinary lyricist. He's been a collaborator of mine many times. he sent me, I'm pulling this up, this article that was written last week by Jeremy Sams, who was a friend of Sondheim's. And here to conclude is a wonderfully life-affirming lyric, complete with trademark internal rhyme from his perforce unfinished musical based on the films of Buñuel. And the piece is still on Steve's piano in the bright and airy Connecticut house where he lived a few days ago, where he died. And the lyric is, if it isn't the sun, it's the bird song. If it isn't the air, it's the view. I'm completely undone by the endless abundance of life, aren't you? And that is so Hammerstein, you know? So it's kind of a full circle coming back to something. If that's the final lyric he ever wrote, I mean, it's poetry upon poetry. It's pretty amazing.
I know that he's been a tremendous influence on all sorts of artists. And I'm wondering, David, if you have, like, how has he influenced you? Do you have does he influence you in a personal way?
Oh, very much so. I have a crazy story about Sondheim, actually. I have a few of them. But after graduating from a music conservatory, I decided to drive around the country in my car because, you know, I wanted to take a super practical approach to my 20s.
Yeah.
And so anyhow, I sent my college musical to Sondheim and I asked if I could study with him. You know, big swing.
Wow.
The naivety of youth on my side, I think. And so to my great surprise, he wrote back. He said he enjoyed the songs, said I'm quite talented as a composer lyricist, but he doesn't really teach. So then I wrote back.
Hold on. That's amazing. Can we just pause for a moment? Yeah. That's just amazing that Sondheim did it. And B, it's amazing. Dude, Sondheim liked your musical.
I thought this was the biggest outlier in the world. Later I would learn he writes to absolutely every single one of his fans. And that was one of the greatest things about Sondheim. He was just so generous, just a generous spirit, so kind, so supportive of new talent. You know, Tick, Tick, Boom recently kind of depicts him, which was, you know, beautiful. I don't know if you guys have seen that yet, but
I haven't yet.
Bradley Whitford really did a great job embodying Stephen Sondheim. And I won't spoil it for those who haven't seen it yet, but you actually hear Sondheim's voice in one of the key scenes in it, which is pretty amazing. But anyhow, I wrote back to him again, thanked him, of course, and said, "Are you sure?" So I basically doubled down. I was like, no, you really should teach me. Like I'm the one who deserves to study with you. And you know, figured I got my foot in the door, why not kick it down? And he was still so gracious. He wrote back again and said, "David, you know, my best advice is for you to move to New York City." So at the time, I think I was sleeping in my car in Mississippi. So I was like, okay, I'm going to New York. And I drove home and moved to New York right after that. It was because of Sondheim, because of that letter. Wow. And that's where I met this lovely lady.
I was just going to
say that as well.
Yeah.
Met this lovely lady on the subway one night in a roundabout way. Thank you, Sondheim. I'm married to Milena.
Oh, man, that's just amazing. Yeah. Well, I've said this to off mic to David and Milena, and I'm gonna say it on mic now because I really want to make this happen. This conversation is too short. I have so much more I want to talk to you about Sondheim, and so I am determined, and I know John is with me, that we're going to make a long, full Cine-Files episode to discuss the life and work of Stephen Sondheim. It's a departure.
Be careful, Steve. It's going to be 14 hours long.
I don't care. I don't
even more so.
Who are you talking to?
I mean, I could spend a whole episode on a single song, and there are hundreds of those I could choose.
I would love that idea. I would love that idea.
Me too. I mean, it's like, and the thing is Sondheim is one of the most important artists in my life, and we're not going to really get to talk about him on the Cine-Files that much because he's not, you know, he did some work that appeared in films, but not that much, you know, whereas, and so I want to make this happen. Maybe it'll be, you know, part of a regular Cine-Files episode. Maybe it'll be its own thing, but I want to make this conversation happen with the four of us. We've already had one conversation about what is, without question, the greatest piece of film that we've seen his work in. And by the way, I just looked it up. When the four of us talked about West Side Story, it was February of 2017.
Wow.
It was,
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh,
So much.
time is so confusing.
I know, it's particularly post-pandemic.
Yeah, throw a pandemic in there. That's very confusing. How long?
And I'm just curious, like, how, you know, it's been a few more years. Like, how have your feelings about West Side Story evolved or changed?
It's still my favorite movie of all time. Who knows? Maybe it'll be one up to this weekend when Milena and I see it. We're actually going to New York on Thursday. And Milena actually doesn't know this until right now. We have tickets at the IMAX theater on Friday night, 8 o'clock.
Yes. Good job, husband. Well done.
Yeah. So we are going to see it. But no, I mean, it's one of those things where if you want to just see what art looks like when you put three geniuses in a room together, go watch West Side Story. And now with Spielberg, maybe four geniuses.
Speaking of which, John, you've seen it.
I have, yes. And I tell you what, I know you're pitching for us. I would love us to get back together and talk about both of those movies in a comparison way, considering the fact that we broke West Side Story down to its nook and crannies in our conversation. And now maybe we could do the same. Because I tell you this, it's not the remake of the movie, and yet it is, which I think is brilliant in both Spielberg's approach. Let me add a fifth genius, Tony Kushner, involved in writing the lyrics and adjusting. And all I can say is it's a completely different approach that finally highlights my people even more in the process. And that was so surprising. So I would love us to get back together and talk about it. It is right now my best picture of the year.
That's so exciting.
And I couldn't believe it because I did not go in expecting
Also,
that.
I just have to say, it better be the best picture of the year. If you are going to reconceive or remake or anything to that beautiful, perfect film, it better be glorious. That's all I got to say.
It's been very funny to see Milena when it was announced. I was the one who was hopeful and excited, and she's like, no.
I was mad about
Why
it.
are they doing this? And I would go look up Rachel Zegler online, listen to her sing. I watched the high school musical version of her singing West Side Story, and I'm like, she's got a great voice.
Yes, she does.
Finally, Anna Maria really can bring it. And Milena's like, I'm not sure. I don't know. And then the trailer came out. And she didn't want to see it. I'm like, girl, sit down and watch this with me. So
I've been known to be stubborn. Let's just leave it at that.
She's been pretty reticent because it's both of our favorite movie and musical of all time.
Well, I think if we can make it happen, this is pending my partner's approval, of course. I think we just said what our next live show is going to be.
I'm down if they have time.
If you guys are all up for coming on camera and because we do a live YouTube show once a month. Actually, our next one is Rocky IV, and we're doing the same thing. We're going to compare the original to the Stallone remake. That's a different kind of film from West Side Story, but maybe sometime in the new year we'll figure a way to get you guys on the books to come onto YouTube and really dig into these two productions. I would absolutely love that.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Okay, so without further ado, we are going to go back to February of 2017 and go back to the streets of New York to watch the Sharks and the Jets one more time. For my partner, John Roca, I am Steve Morris. Thank you so much, David and Milena, for coming back. And we now give you West Side Story. welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film, explore its themes, its history, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hey everybody, my name is John Roca. I'm a voiceover artist, host of numerous shows, and occasional actor here in Los Angeles.
You were laughing at me.
No, in a good way, because you're so excited for this new experiment, because we have 4 mics, 2 different H4Ns and one H5N, or one H4N, one H5N, so there's a lot here, and I'm looking forward to seeing you do it all.
No, there's a lot going on right now, because for the first time on the Cine-Files, we have not one, but 2 guests. David Cornue and Milena Govich we're incredibly lucky to have them here. David Cornue is a composer who's worked in the theater and has worked in television, is currently developing a Stephen King project for the VR space of the book Insomnia. David, welcome to the Cine-Files.
Why, thank you, Steve. It's great to be here.
And we're also lucky to have Milena Govich, who is a musical theater actress who started on Broadway, worked in television. You might have seen her in Law & Order, Rescue Me, in Finding Carter. Milena, welcome to the Cine-Files.
Thank you so much, Steve.
But we're so lucky to have you, in particular, because today we are doing West Side Story, and I know both of you have a special connection to this musical.
Absolutely, we do.
It may be our favorite film of all time, collectively.
Both to the musical and to the film?
Yes.
Yes, it's a desert island film for us.
So let me ask you, how did you first come to this musical?
Well, I remember very, very clearly when I first saw it, but my parents are both music professors. So there were voice lessons happening in my living room every day of my childhood. So I grew up with this music. I could sing Tonight by the time I was 4 years old. And
what was that like growing up with music professors in your house?
Loud? No, it was fantastic. There were college students coming in and out all the time, and those were all my friends. I thought I was the coolest kid around, you know?
And did you always want to be a musician or a singer?
I have always loved the arts, and I've always sung, and I play instruments and I dance, and I've done that since I was tiny. My big rebellion was in college. I was a pre-med major.
How long did that last?
I got my degree.
Wow.
So yeah, I actually have a bachelor's of science in pre-med.
Have you ever considered falling back to medical school?
Well, I did at the time, but I couldn't get this this New York bug out of me. So I decided, I was applying to medical schools, and I decided, wow, if I go to medical school, I can't do a show at night. I can't be in the orchestra. My voice is going to be crap because I'm never going to sleep. So I just wasn't willing to walk away from everything. So instead, I moved to New York.
It's so funny. I had such a similar experience because I didn't have music professors growing up with them, but I didn't have that experience. But I did have doing theater all through childhood. And in high school, I was going to be an actor. And then I saw the really good actors in high school, and I went, oh, I can't do that. So somewhere at the end of high school, I said, I'm going to be responsible, and I'm going to become a lawyer, I wanted to go into politics for a long time, and I said, I'm going to be a poli-sci major. So I went to Berkeley. I'm studying political science. But, well, maybe I'll do a play on the side, and maybe I'll do another play, and maybe I'll do some more theater. Well, I've taken half the theater classes. I guess I'll be a double major. And by the end of it, I was barely going to my political science classes, and I was really going to my theater classes all the time. So I had a really similar experience.
Yeah.
And so you went to New York.
Yep. I was a total cliche because I'm from Oklahoma. I took a one-way ticket, 2 suitcases, violin on my back, went to the big city.
And had you been there before? Did you have New York experience?
Not really. The first time I ever visited New York was only a year before that.
Wow.
I went and visited for 13 days. I saw 17 shows. I went to auditions. It was my research reconnaissance trip. I went there going, all right, I got to decide if I want to live here or not. So I did everything I could to experience New York to its fullest. And I loved it the second I got there.
Really?
I still do. Yeah.
Didn't have any like major culture shock?
No.
You were just like, this is for me.
The thing I said, I stayed with my aunt who was living there at the time, and I said to her, wow, I'm finally in a city that moves at my pace.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Oklahoma must have seemed a little slow?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. David, what about you? How did you become involved were you always a musician?
I was a songwriter from day one.
You came out of the womb tapping your toe in 3-4 times.
Exactly. Yeah. As far back as I can remember, I was writing songs. I wrote songs for my mother while she cooked dinner for us at night. I'd go over to the piano and she'd say, what are you going to play for me tonight? And I would write her a song. I discovered West Side Story maybe Well, it had to be around puberty, because I remember watching all those girls up on stage saying, "I got to get me one of those," and I did. And
Well done.
go.
Good work there.
and then I really dove into West Side Story in college. I went and got a classical music composition degree in college, really practical degree.
Sure.
And I remember watching the film again and just falling in love with it all over. And I actually took the entire score of West Side Story and transcribed it in college, note for note, to feel what it feels like to be Leonard Bernstein writing those songs.
He's also a huge nerd.
I was going to say, that is a majorly nerdy thing to do.
It was one of the best composition lessons of my life.
Just writing down every single note.
Writing down those notes and thinking about how he structured those songs, structured those melodies, the harmonic and rhythmic complexity that he put underneath it. And yeah, it was one of the best things I ever did.
It's such a unique score. I mean, just listening to it, it doesn't sound like anything else. And I love musical theater. So for me, my parents, their big record collection was folk music, like Kingston Trio and the Limelighters and Peter, Paul and Mary and stuff like that, and musicals. And so the records I listened to over and over again when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 were Camelot and The King and I and all of those classic old musicals and Guys and Dolls. And they took me they had season tickets to the touring company in San Francisco at the Golden Gate Theater. So when I was 9 or 10, all these musicals came through, and they were just at the time where the real people were still doing them. So I saw Yul Brynner in The King and I.
Wow.
I saw Rex Harrison in My Fair Lady. I saw Dick Van Dyke in Music Man, which isn't quite the original, but was still pretty cool. And I saw Sweeney Todd when I was 11. Now, I don't know who was in it at this point, because those names, Angela Lansbury, they didn't really mean anything to me. But I was 11 years old, and Sweeney Todd was I don't think my parents knew what they were getting me into. And it was like the greatest and the most terrible theater experience I'd ever had in my life. I think I was told I was pale at the end of it. But then for weeks, I couldn't stop talking about it. And of course, made my parents buy the record, and I'm listening to Sweeney Todd. And I remember listening to West Side Story, and West Side Story being like nothing else. It doesn't sound like anything else that's in the musical theater to this day, I think.
It is a one-of-a-kind score, and it's because of a fusion of classical music, 20th century music, opera, and jazz. And then you have the Latin American flair.
Yeah.
It's really just that fusion and the energy of all of those different things working together. There's a fugue in the middle of Cool. Who does a fugue? Not only is it a fugue, it's a 12-tone fugue, which is a technique used by 20th century composers. And he does it effortlessly.
John, how did you first come to West Side Story?
I came to it as a kid. My parents are first. I'm first generation American. My parents are Bolivian. So for us, anything that was Latino based, even though at the time I didn't know it was Natalie Wood, I didn't know this as a child. To me, these were all Latinos dancing and singing in Puerto Rico. Like all of that was just so great to experience. So for me, it was always appointment viewing, because a lot of people don't remember back then. You couldn't just pick it up and watch it on YouTube. You couldn't just order it or buy it or whatever. Like you had to wait till it showed on television. So it was either on PBS or one of the Sunday night movie or something. And I remember we would watch it as a family, and it was something that it awoke a desire and a love of musical theater for me, or musicals, period, as a movie genre, and from there forward, like just seeing, when you see that as your first one, it kind of opens your mind.
Do you think
up.
it was your first musical?
Yeah, I really believe it was. And then after that, it was Singing in the Rain, all the Gene Kelly ones. Like I'm a massive Gene Kelly fan, so to me, it's this is the one that opened up the door, because I saw the potential of, because it transcends the genre, it elevates the genre. Like every genre has one film that like elevates it, and I think West Side Story is the one. The fact that it's based in Shakespeare, the fact that you have the 4-part harmonies going on tonight, you have all
this stuff going on, and then you have this real stuff where best friends are getting killed, and this love, and the death, and her reaction to the death. Like, all of it was what I grew up around, poor Latinos, those kinds of things. You saw that anger, you saw that the vibrancy, and there's such a joy in the music as well, along with pain. There's all this juxtaposition and these romantic moments that, like the fog, the haze rather, when he sees Maria for the first time. Tony sees Maria. There's no one else in the world, right? So all those, the romantic that I am from birth was so in love with this film because it just conveyed all of that.
Do you remember how your parents reacted to it?
Yes, my mom absolutely loved the film, and my dad was always like skipping. And my dad's like the old school Latino, macho, all that kind of stuff. So if any film got through to him that he would sing the songs or play around with the songs, it always resonated with me because we were so different. Because I was a sensitive kid who was into arts, and my dad was very much not, of sports and soccer and all that stuff. So when anything that would ever cross over for me, it was. Or for him, it was so resonant with me. Like Amadeus, that's his favorite film, bar none. And we're talking about a guy from a small town in Bolivia who worked on farms, loving this music, this film about a composer in Austria. He loved West Side Story for the grittiness of it, and also for the way it elevated this idea of, because he lived during that time, this idea of the Latinos versus the whites and the gangs and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I definitely want to talk about the Latino experience in terms of this film, but it's interesting to me that we have Amadeus and West Side Story. It's like, here are these two movies. They're both very theatrical. They both have a huge connection to music.
Yeah.
They both have a tremendous artistic sensibility, and these are your movies that your dad really connected to.
It's mind-blowing to me. And he also loved Hamlet, the Brana Hamlet. He was a mad fan for the Brana Hamlet. I took him to see it at the Uptown in D.C., and he stayed awake. See, the thing is, as my dad got older, if he fell asleep during a movie, it's not a good movie. He didn't like it. But he stayed awake through all 4 hours of Brana's Hamlet.
Wow.
And I was amazed by this. So my dad, I think, was always an artist who didn't know it. And but he would enjoy these things. But he was always selective ones. So that meant to me they were worth praise. They were worthy film.
So speaking of Shakespeare, where we got to start is we have to start this with Romeo and Juliet. So this is, and where this idea begins.
No, wait a sec.
Okay.
When did you first see the film? You talked about the score. You talked about listening to music. When did you see the film?
I think I saw it on TV,
Okay.
just the same way as you did in high school. And I believe I had read Romeo and Juliet before I saw.
Okay.
So I kind of knew, what this was about. But, maybe I'd read Romeo and Juliet in junior high, something like that. It's kind of hard to process the language.
Sure.
I knew what the story was. But then I think the emotional reaction I didn't have in reading Romeo and Juliet, I had the first time I saw West Side Story.
Yeah.
Because it is brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, the end of West Side Story is so tough. And having just watched it again, just as tough. And so it hung with me in a way much more than Hamlet did, or much more than Romeo and Juliet did. It took me a while to sort of become a good enough reader of Shakespeare to really appreciate Romeo and Juliet the same way.
Because they both don't die. They both don't die.
Right.
Like Daggett Wood in Romeo and Juliet. She stays alive, and that reaction is so visceral, man. It's so pure.
Yeah, well, we're going to definitely get into that when we get to the ending.
I actually didn't see the movie until I was probably 14.
Oh, wow.
I knew all the songs. I knew the score,
Right.
but I'd never seen the film. And I had similar reaction. I just bawled, and I still do. We rewatched the movie as well, and I just cried like a baby.
Yeah, we watched it earlier this week, and it was like the first time we'd ever seen it. We both had the same reaction at the end of the film. It is so powerful. It is so moving.
So I want to give a little bit of history of the film, but I also am pretty darn sure you guys know much more about this than me. So I'm going to start, but please feel free to jump in. My understanding is the original idea came from Leonard Bernstein, and he wanted to do Romeo and Juliet, and it was going to be Catholics and Jews. That
It was
was
actually Jerome Robbins.
Jerome Robbins came up with the original idea.
And he approached
This is
Leonard
why I have you here.
Bernstein because they had worked on Fancy Free on the Town and thought he would be a great composer for it. And yes, it was called East Side Story, and it was going to be Catholics and Jews. And Tony was going to be the Catholic, and Maria was a Jewish girl who had survived the Holocaust and had made it to America. And eventually they shelved the project for a number of years. I think it was in the late 40s when they were
is that early?
First talking about it.
Oh, wow.
And then approached it years later and said, we want to move it to the West Side and let's give it more of the Latino angle. And that was in the news at the time. So it seemed more current and they could do more with the music. And it went from there. But yes, I think some of the songs, I believe Maria was one of the first songs written, and it was written for East Side Story.
And I think One Hand, One Heart.
And One Hand, One Heart.
Also written for East Side Story.
Really? Oh, that's interesting. And do you know, and was Arthur Lorenz brought in next?
Yeah, they...
So Arthur Lorenz wrote the book, so he's sort of like the playwright, essentially.
Yeah, one of the really interesting things about West Side Story is that it was developed really as a team. It's often these days in a development process, there's one person that has the idea. You know, the composer, lyricist gets with the book writer, they write it, they make their thing, then they're going to find a choreographer, then they're going to find a director. But this is one of those really special projects where all the elements were together from the beginning. And it was a true collaboration as they were discovering the story and discovering the tone that they wanted to hit and the way the characters were going to interact and the way the music was going to support it.
I actually
or drive
reference
it.
this a lot. I reference this as the way to write a musical because you had the entire team there from day one to say, what is our collective vision? So much these days, it's a couple of writers go off, work on a show for years and years, and then they take it to a producer, and the producer says, well, that's good, guys, but let's do this instead. And what you end up getting is people adding on their vision to something, but there's not this unified vision. And that's one of the great reasons why the genesis of West Side Story brought us such a powerful, unified idea.
Well, and you have 4 guys, or at least 3 of the 4 guys, who go on to be or are great geniuses in their own right. You know, and so you have Leonard Bernstein, you have, wait, is it Bernstein or Bernstein?
Either, but most people say Bernstein.
Okay. You got Lenny. Yes. You've got Jerome Robbins, the great choreographers of all time. You have Stephen Sondheim, who goes on to be one of the great musical theater people of all time. And you have Arthur Lorenz, who has an incredible career, maybe not quite as big as the other ones. And so you have titans, and you would expect these are exactly the kinds of guys who wouldn't be able to collaborate together. And yet the opposite is true. They seem to make each other better.
Well, and you also have Hal Prince, their
Hal
lead
Prince,
producer, who.
So let's add another one. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know if you guys have found this in your career, but often I find in my career some of the most talented and the best people to work with are not driven by ego. That's not to say there weren't egos there.
Like Jerome Robbins.
There were bananas egos, but I think the piece itself was so important to all of these people that they were really invested in telling the story. And they had their disagreements, but at the end they were all driving to tell this story. And I think that's how you ended up with such a great collaboration.
They also were all so visionary in their own right, but they balanced one another, the talents of each other in a really surprising way. So Sondheim thought that Bernstein's music and lyrics sometimes were too, quote, purple. And so
what does that mean?
So basically he thought, Bernstein actually wrote some of the lyrics. He was supposed to get a co-lyric credit with Sondheim. And finally said, hey kid, you can have the credit for that. And Sondheim was like, I don't know if I want the credit with that, with some of your lyrics in there. Because, suns and moons and stars and everything, that's all Bernstein. And Sondheim brought in that each one of these songs, each one of these lyrics is coming from a place of character. And it was so specific and it gave it edge. So that's an example of the two of them balancing each other out, because we actually like the suns and moons and stars in that thing. And same thing with the music. So Bernstein's music was sometimes too, quote, operatic to people. And Jerome Robbins would say, bring it in. We need to make this more current. We need to work on, the Latino flair of this thing. Let's really bring that in. So he wanted the dance component to it. So everyone pushing against each other's talents made for a greater piece of art.
Well, and this experience is true for me too, because not to compare myself in any way, but I do my best work when I'm pushed. And I don't always like being pushed. Being pushed is not pleasant.
This
I like
is true.
it.
This is true.
Yeah, I like it when people say everything you've done is amazing. And I go, good, that's exactly why I did it. And yet my work gets better when someone criticizes it and pushes it and I get angry and frustrated and then I stay up all night and I make it better.
Well, the corollary to that is when you're working with incredibly talented people, you want to rise to their level.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think that is also happening. If you're on this team and Leonard Bernstein brings in this new piece of music or this new dance arrangement and you're Jerome Robbins, it's like you want to perform to that level and vice versa.
And you got to look at this time in history, right? This is a transition period, not just in acting styles, but in the country, right? So we're wanting to learn more about the character stuff. We're gravitating to more of the inner workings of a human being as we watch stuff on film. So you're seeing this transition from old school Hollywood or old school musical theater into something a little more smaller, a little more specific, a little more grounded, grittier. So logically, Bernstein and Sondheim are going to smash it because Sondheim doesn't write anything close to this going forward. His stuff is it's deeper, it's darker. Like you said, Sweeney Todd, that affects you because it's a darker, more specific type of musical. And so what you see here is that causes both of them to learn from each other, I'm sure, and come even closer to what they're trying to do separately as visionary, and then together create, like you said, a dream team, right? Like what you see in 1992, where they had the dream team, they all had to kind of acquiesce to each other so that they all could shine together as a team, and you see the results of it here in the movie.
Well, one of the interesting things I was thinking about just as I was doing research was you got these 4 guys or 5 with Hal Prince. Is Hal Prince Jewish, by the way?
Yes.
So we have 5 Jews who write this quintessential Latino, Irish, Polish immigrant, and it's extremely masculine, violent story. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about Hal Prince, but 3 of the 4 guys were gay, closeted gay at the time. Mm-hmm. Jerome Robbins is bisexual, is my understanding, or maybe not.
That would have been the term at the time,
or maybe not.
Well, and Leonard Bernstein.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
He was married.
I know he was married and had kids.
Yeah.
So you have these guys who are like really not who this is not their life experience, and yet they write this amazing thing, which is one of those. There's always this thing you say to writers, which is, oh, you got to write what you know, and I do think you have to write what you know, but I also think the creative process is you can write about things that aren't your experience and do it great, and they create a really magical. It's not a realistic world, but it's a really magical world they create in this film.
Well, the story that they're telling is so universal. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're still dealing with it today, unfortunately.
That's what I was thinking when I was watching it.
So, it is an unfortunate resonance at this point in time. But, you know, that's what I really believe as an actor, because I'm handed material all the time to say, okay, make this work. And, you know, it's an alien battling who, you know, whatever. You've got these bizarre circumstances, but what's the truth of the story? And this dream team of creators are so in tune to themselves and to their art and to their passions. And so you give them relationships, and regardless of the specifics of the circumstance, we all know what those relationships are. We all know what it's like to have love, to lose love, to fight for love, friendship, camaraderie, culture, society. I mean, we all know what those things are. And they were really driving into the heart of each one of those things. We weren't dealing with the specifics of the politics of the day. They were simply a backdrop. And so they were really going to the heart of these characters.
Well, I would counter a little bit to say, because America very much deals with the politics of the day for the Latinos, right?
That's true, yeah.
Because they're saying, better get rid of your accent. Like, these things are real, and they still exist now. As we're
Very
seeing
much
these
so.
attacks going since the election, go back home. We see these people publishing all over Facebook and on social media about these notes that are being left on their cars, being yelled at in the streets, being made fun of for their accents, being made fun of for how they look.
So it premieres on Broadway in 1957. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And my understanding is that while it was a hit, it wasn't a huge hit. It didn't win the Tony. I think Music Man won the Tony.
Music Man won that year.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I like Music Man.
Sure.
And that is a perfectly American
But
musical
that's a perfect
song
example.
for that time.
That's what the appetite was.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what the musical appetite was, and the Broadway appetite. And so, West Side Story was the underdog.
Yeah.
It's everything that makes it so unique and distinct, and the reason why we're still talking about it today is also the reason why there was some resistance at first. And I think it did run for about 300 performances or so. But yes, that was considered a moderate success at the time. Wow. And it was because people weren't sure how to take the intensity of it and the complexity of the music.
It really started taking off once it started touring. Once it started going out, I think there were 2 national companies. There was a company in London. So the familiarity of it started to breed the word of mouth, which would be a more traditional marketing campaign now. But that's not really how it worked back then. So there was more of a groundswell of support for the stage play. And then once the movie came out, people already knew what it was. So it didn't feel like, I mean, while it was highly groundbreaking for a movie musical, people already knew the story. People already knew the music.
Yeah.
From mostly from the tours.
Well, and it seems as if it became more of an event at that point. And I think maybe society had changed enough that they were more willing to watch this. And so when they go to make it a movie musical, they bring in Robert Wise, who is an old school director, who is, of course, the editor of Citizen Kane. You know, so right there you got some cred. And if you look at Robert Wise's credits up to that point, he was a working director. And are all those movies great movies? No, they're not all great movies. No. He was a go-to guy, and everything I understand about Robert Wise is he was a lovely, lovely person to work with.
That's what everyone says about Robert Wise. He was the classiest guy. Even with all of the drama around Jerome Robbins, and I'm sure we'll get into that, you'll never hear Robert Wise say a bad thing about Jerome Robbins. And he was the first person to say, when they were nominated for an Oscar, make sure to fly Jerome out here and come up on stage with me.
So they do a thing which is almost never done in Hollywood, which is we have co-directors. It's directed by Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins. And I am sure I can imagine the meetings of the producers where they say, look, Jerome's a genius. We can't have him directing this film. We need to get a guy who's a solid guy who understands the filmmaking process, who understands budgets and schedules and how to work with people. And so they pair these two up. And it seems like that it was a great pairing in all sorts of ways. And Jerome Robbins, from everything I've heard, is passionate and a perfectionist and difficult and emotional. And he drove people. And in the long run, he drove people so hard, and he drove the schedule so hard and drove the budget so hard that they had to fire him.
Correct.
They really had no choice. I mean,
that's what it sounds like.
They were hundreds of thousands of dollars over budget. They were supposed to shoot the prologue in 2 weeks, and it took 2 months. Oh, no, is that right?
No, that's right. That's right. It's the only, the prologue and the jet song is the only song in the whole piece that's shot on location. Everything else is on stage.
Wow.
And so they had flown the whole cast to New York to do this. So not only are they, over budget on the schedule, but their travel budget is like quadrupled now. And when Jerome Robbins was eventually let go, he had already staged and rehearsed everything. The dancers were rehearsed. The choreography was set. The problems were coming in is because they would go to shoot it and then he would start changing everything.
And he did that a lot throughout the prologue, and by all accounts made it better because he did. He wanted to take the location they were at and the way the sun was hitting that day and make sure that it was perfect. He was also doing things that were sort of revolutionary at the time with the cameras, like digging a hole in the ground so that he could have an upward vantage point.
I'm going to give that to Robert Wise.
Yeah,
because that's from
Conrad
Citizen Kane.
Yeah,
that's Citizen Kane. Yeah.
Well, the advantage that Jerome Robbins took with those kind of cameras angles is that you can see the feet
right
in the choreography, and I'm sure we'll talk about the choreography as well. But that was a big Fred Astaire thing.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
He always wanted the wider the medium
whole
shot,
body.
and I want the feet in frame all the time.
Yeah.
And you get that here, but you still get point of view.
Yeah.
I think what you lose in some of the Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire stuff is you don't feel like you really have a point of view. You feel like you're watching a proscenium in a lot of their dance stuff because of that limitation. But by using these low angles and these odd oblique angles, you're getting the feet, you're getting the full body performance, but you also feel like you're really getting a character POV.
Well, and beautifully composed shots. And this is where that collaboration between Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins is so palpable, particularly in the prologue, is that you have Robert Wise, whose training is as an editor. And as an editor myself, editors want more shots. Like, that's what we want to cover the scene. And I think Jerome Robbins took that maybe to extremes and kept pushing for more shots and more angles. But the shot composition, let's talk about this prologue a little bit, because it's a remarkable piece of filmmaking.
It's phenomenal.
Because what's happening in West Side Story is we enter a world that's not real. Okay, but we enter it through a window that is real. And that's what's really remarkable, is you begin, even, you know, in the as the credits are rolling, with this abstract sort of Saul Bass image of Manhattan, which when you first see it, you don't even know what that is you're looking at. You're listening to the overture, and slowly it changes colors, and then eventually you get these overhead shots of New York City.
Which were never done like that before.
Yeah.
The straight down overhead shots of the city were absolutely groundbreaking at the time.
And I before we even go past the overture, there's not an overture in the stage play.
Oh, really?
It starts
On the prologue.
with
Oh, I didn't
snaps.
know that.
Wow.
Yeah. It was so brilliant that they chose to do it for this. That overture tells the whole story.
Right.
It tells the whole story with the music. You're primed as a viewer before you even figure out what the abstract art is. You're primed to be driven by music. And the music is the subtext for the whole thing. So we're already there. So the music is already leading us. So by the time we get the images, emotionally, we're ready to go.
And you get these overhead New York shots, and then we move into, which are, I think you mentioned before in another podcast, maybe very similar to Sound of Music.
Yeah.
The way Sound of Music, because we go into which is also Robert Wise, also a musical. When you go into the Alps, you're doing this similar jump cut through scenery thing. And then we get to the jets coming into the park. And what they're doing there is introducing the language of dance for the film. Is that first they're just walking, and then you see a small dance move, and then you see a little turn, and then you see a shoulder shrug, and slowly but surely you're introducing to the audience to, this is how things exist in this world.
And if you look at the choreography, the way the Sharks are choreographed versus the Jets, it's very, very specific. And so when we're first seeing the Sharks, the Jets rather, that moment where all this walking, and then one steps back and does a rond de jambe, and then the other one, and it's all very lifted. They're up, you know.
I think people lose sight of the fact that they are jets up in the sky and sharks down in the
never
water.
occurred to me.
And
He's
you
jumping my point here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
can
the
edit
whole
married
opening-
couples.
No,
Yeah, go
it's okay. That's hilarious. No, we're on the same page. I mean, this is what we're going to run into. But their choreography is very lifted. They do a lot of jumps. Their arms are reaching to the sky all the time. And then you introduce Bernardo. And the first time we see him dance is with his two cohorts, and it's low. It's low.
Right.
It's really scrappy, and it's sharper. They do really sharp turns, and their arms pop out, and they'll do one big bop ma kick, but it's immediately back to the ground. So it's aspirational. What they're trying to get up, but they can't. They got to be down here.
Never went in my brain at all.
And
That's
then when they
amazing.
start chasing each other, they start mimicking each other in the choreography. You see the Jets start getting low as they're chasing, and then all the shenanigans start happening. But the story is told in dance.
And to your point, Steve, when it's on stage, it's figurative up there. It's theatrical.
It's theatrical. Plays
Right.
are theatrical from the beginning.
But when you put it on film, it all of a sudden has a literal place. We are at a basketball court. How do we get a bunch of gang members to start dancing ballet and go along with this story?
Right.
And it's brilliant. It's truly brilliant how it is introduced. snap by snap, really, and bringing us along into
the
this
whistle.
world. And the whistle.
Yeah,
Oh, the
right.
whistle's great.
Yeah, and I get upset when I was watching it in the break room at Universal Studios. I put it on. Like, we have a TV, and I put it on. It was on TCM. And the younger kids were like making fun of it. Oh, they're gang members doing, and these are dancers making fun of what they're watching, right? And I'm like, you're all insane. I'm going to kill all of you because you don't understand what's happening. You don't understand what you're looking at because you're 20-year-old punks and you don't understand like what is happening here. Yes, they're gang members. Yes, but the dance it's going to grow because they're here now. They're on top of the world now. As the film progresses, their dance gets hungrier, grittier, dirtier, more grungy. It just becomes more desperate because of what's happening. So you have to start here to get, as the film progresses, down to the real nitty-gritty of the dance. And Cool really does that, you know? And so sometimes when I see people that don't appreciate what they're watching, I go insane.
My mother has a great story about this.
Oh, yeah.
She saw West Side Story in the theater, in the film, when it first opened. And she grew up in Queens, and she was hanging around with a bunch of punks, basically, at the time. And they went as well. And that opening prologue, they started to make fun of the film. By the end of the film, they were all crying.
Right.
Well, because you have to accept it. I mean, that's the sort of, it's like, okay, yeah, you know what? It is weird. These guys are doing weird stuff. You know,
Well,
that's
and
weird.
They auditioned actor dancers for this forever.
Wow.
There were extensive auditions because they were asking these young performers to do something nobody's ever really done, which is do highly stylized choreography, highly stylized dialogue,
Very highly stylized.
but be 100% real.
Yeah.
And that is not easy to do. So you look at the silly choreography or the moments at the top where it's lighter. They believe everything they're doing.
Yeah.
There's no wink. There's no commenting.
Mm-hmm.
These people are living.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely crucial to establish that at the top, or you don't get the ending.
Well, I think that's interesting too. Why you have Russ Tamblyn in charge, because Russ was obviously experienced in doing MGM musical, Seven Brides, Seven Brothers, a number of other things. So you have not necessarily maybe a dance captain, but certainly the right guy to be in charge of these new people coming onto the scene, coming onto film to do this kind of dance. And he is like the crossover between the musicals of back in the 50s to what we're seeing come into in the 60s here.
He was also really great at establishing the tone and bringing us in.
Yeah.
You know, it's also stylized language, and he did that just as naturally as he did the dance. You know, having words like prodicality in the film, and you know, it's that sort of thing that he had to really sell. But like Milena said, so grounded and so real while he did it, we went along.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, we have our well-educated Jews choosing not to, in fact, invent realistic language. Like, we're going to figure out how these kids really talk. They go, no, we're just going to invent a new language.
Yeah.
And we're going to make it up. And that is how people talk in this movie, which it's like, well, we're doing Shakespeare. This is the language of reality here. People speak in iambic pentameter.
Yeah.
You know, this is the reality of the language of these streets. And that's what and once you accept it, then you're in. Mm-hmm. So we move on to the story. We've introduced ourselves to the Sharks and the Jets, and we see their conflict. And then we go off to meet Tony.
Tony.
Yeah. We go off to meet Tony, who's the guy, he's the person who's moving on.
He's trying to grow up. He's trying his best.
He's working for Doc.
And at the same time, we know there's going to be a meeting between the Sharks and the Jets at this dance. And we also meet Maria, who's Natalie Wood, who's the big star. She's the big star in the movie. And, you know, yes, we have a non-Latina playing this role, but
It's okay. Yeah, it's like Eli Wallach. We talked when we did Magnificent Seven. Like Eli Wallach was essentially a honorary Latino, even though he's a New
So
York
you give
Jew.
Natalie
But Natalie,
gets the same-
absolutely, because Natalie really conveys that kind of innocence of a young Latina girl with the wide eyes and everything. Just the belief of it. You know, we're a passionate people. We're a romantic people,
And still
So
smart
she-
and sassy and
exactly
all of that.
All of that.
Yeah,
and
she's great.
And was it Marnie Nixon who does the
Yes.
singing?
Yes.
It's believable that it comes out of her mouth, which is why it took forever for people to realize that it was Marnie who sang. Like, people just believed that it was Natalie, and she's so good at it.
So just to give a little more to this, so Natalie Wood did lay down tracks
Yes.
for all the vocals, and then for those of you who don't know, when you do a movie musical, in general, people aren't singing live on the set. In general, now there are exceptions to this.
Yeah, Les Miserables.
Les Mis, yeah, it's the most recent one that's the exception. There's also a Frank Capra, Bing Crosby one where they did it in the 30s. But
oh wow,
yeah, or 40s. But it's not very good, so you don't need to watch it. But in general, they lay down the tracks and they sing to playback.
Yeah.
And so Natalie Wood is singing to her own playback, and she thinks that she's going to be the voice that's in the film, and was obviously quite upset when they bring in Marni Nixon, who is an amazing soprano who also did The King and I, dubbed Deborah Kerr singing, and did My Fair Lady, and dubbed Audrey Hepburn.
She also had the Herculean task of matching Natalie Wood's performance, which is the reverse of what you typically do.
Right.
But the reason they did that is because Natalie Wood had it in her contract that she was going to sing unless the executives in post just felt she wasn't up to snuff, and was told on set over and over, this is great, it sounds wonderful. So she had no reason to think otherwise.
Right.
And as soon as they wrapped all, picture lock for her, they basically told her, sorry, we're going to go with Marni Nixon.
However, I think you don't get Natalie Wood's performance without her doing that.
Yep. Yeah.
It's because the music is so integral to the storytelling, and you go from dialogue in and out of song, and it's got to feel the same. It's got to be so believable. So I think it was smart. The producers did it that way, frankly.
For the art, it was definitely
absolutely.
the best way. If for her to think that she was singing, I think brought something else to the performance.
And we've actually heard her original tracks, a few clips.
I've heard clips too.
Yeah.
Really?
And it's not bad. She's not a trained singer.
Is this like Nicole Kidman in Moulin Rouge, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Or
You know
Yeah.
what?
Close, but
If
not
Natalie, if they had done it today and they had the technology today to help sweeten things for her in post, you probably could have gotten away with it.
Maybe, but she certainly
doesn't
doesn't
have
have
the
a high C.
Yeah,
No, she's just not a trained singer. She doesn't have the breath support to do this particular material.
Yeah. It's similar to Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. That's kind of the same vocal timbre and range it felt like it had.
So there's a lot of interesting choices made in terms of camera work that you see in this film, and there's because of new technology coming in that you really don't see again. So the first one is the use of color. So obviously there's a color scheme within the film. The jets are in these brighter colors, or yellows and tans, and the sharks are in purples and blues, and that we have these red backgrounds, and we have really strong color control and set design. But then they're also using color control in camera, and what I think it is, and I'm not 100% sure, is it looks as if what they're doing is when you shoot a film and you go into post, you look at the film and you go, oh, these shots don't match exactly, and so you do color correction in post. And back in the day, today we use computers to do color correction. But back in the day, what you would do was you would run the negative through the chemical bath, and you would make a duplicate. You would make a positive out of it, and then you would, as you were doing that, you would shine different colored lights at it in different proportions to do the color correction. And what it looks like they're doing is they're using this for artistic effect. So they're suddenly turning up the red, or turning up the blue, or turning up the gold, because you could see one of the ways you can tell is that the whole image is shifting color simultaneously. So if they were changing lights on the set, you would see the effect of those lights hitting different things at different points, but that's not what's happening. And there's really no other movie, or very few other movies I can think of, that use this effect so often. And he uses it as we go into their wedding. He uses it in the dance. He uses it various places. And then he's also using various designs of split diopters, which allow things to go in and out of focus. So we'll have, particularly in Mambo, where Tony and Maria see each other and the world seems to fall away, everything else goes dark and goes out of focus so they can have this private moment. And it's really beautiful. That's my favorite one of those.
Yeah, it's so effective.
It really is. And the choreography for all of that stayed the same. Interestingly, that moment where Tony sees Maria and everything goes out of focus, the choreography that's still happening is exactly what was on stage.
Oh, wow.
The dancers start to thin out. People exit stage right, exit stage left, move up stage so that they are left downstage. It's really interesting. They've done a proscenium staging, but filmed it in a really interesting way using the effects you're talking about.
Yeah.
I guess I'll say this. Some of the transitions do feel dated, but the music helps to transcend that. So still today, you forgive some of those things that feel like something from the 60s because it's the music transcends the whole piece.
I feel the same way. But you know what I think about it is I kind of go like, this is what this piece of art is. Sometimes people come to you as a writer or a director and they go, why did you make that choice? That choice doesn't make sense. And you're frequently put in the position of defending your choice. And honestly, as an artist, you do have to learn to defend your choice. You do have to, and if you can't defend your choice, then maybe it's not such a good choice. But there is a time in which when someone says, why does that character do this? Or why do they dance that way? Or why is that character, that color what it is? And the answer is because that's what it is. Because that is this piece of accept it, don't accept it, it's up to you. And this is West Side Story. West Side Story, they fight by doing, grand jetés. In West Side Story, they speak in a way that nobody's ever spoken before. In West Side Story, strangely enough, gang members are color coordinated. In West Side Story, things go out of focus. People have marriage ceremonies and dress ups. This is what happens in West Side Story. And this is the world you get to enter into. And it's a lovely world, and you should enter into it. And sometimes accept the art for what it is. Don't question it. You'll enjoy it more that way.
I like that.
Let's talk about Rita Moreno and America.
Let's do.
It's my favorite number in the show.
Once an immigrant, always an immigrant.
Hey, look, instead of a shampoo, she's been brainwashed.
Stop it.
She was given a Puerto Rico and now she's queer for Uncle Sam.
Oh, no. That's not true.
Puerto Rico, my heart's devotion. Let it sink back in the ocean. Always the hurricanes blowing. Always the population growing. And the money owing. And the sunlight streaming. And the natives steaming. I like the island Manhattan.
I know you do.
Smoke on your pipe and put that in.
I like to be in America. Okay, by me in America. Everything free in America.
For a small fee in America.
It's so much fun.
It's so good.
It's so much fun. It has so much content to it. And her performance is off the charts explosive.
It really is. And what's interesting is that in the stage play, America takes place in the dress shop with the three girls. It's a trio. And Anita is bantering with her best friend about this. So for the film, they brought it up to the roof, added the guys, and the 2 points of view became the male-female point of view, which was so smart. And it just expands the whole scope of the song.
And the thing too, like it's always remarkable when there's an amazing change and you look at in a play coming to a movie in this case, and you look at it and go, how could they possibly have ever done it any other way? Because it's not just that having Bernardo adds the sex to it, although that's great. And it's not just that it adds different colors, although that's great, but it's also that Bernardo's a main character in the show, where the other girls in the dress shop are not, and that he has and this song is directly about his conflict with the Jets. So the song takes on all these other meanings because you have him and the guys there that it wouldn't have otherwise. And it goes to the point of even the most brilliant artists in the world, and these guys making this thing where the most brilliant artists in the world don't come up with every great idea at once. It takes time. These things take developing. You're going to argue about it, and eventually you get to what's looking at it now is obvious.
And you have the luxury of, when you're adapting something, they have the luxury of watching their show run for 4 years before they're adapting to the screen. So they can see what works and see how it plays to an audience over and over, all over the country, all over the world.
Oh, gotcha.
So for America, I think that one of the real successes of that song and the number as a whole is that it is aspirational. There's hope, there's verve, there's ambition. But at the same time, you're dealing with really specific, real issues. But they're still playful with it, and they're still having fun. So we love these people. We're in their world, and Rita Moreno is just transcendent in it. She brings everything you could possibly hope for. The dialogue, the witty comebacks, the sex.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest things. I mean, it's such an improvement over the Broadway musical because of the sexual charge.
Right.
You're having a social debate, but it's sexy. And damn, it's sexy. I mean,
That's how we do it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
You just can't help yourself.
I'm just saying, we're passionate people, man. That's just how it works. But no, but it's because it's an issue, and they're exploring both sides of it.
Right.
Fleshing it out. It's not one way or the other. It's not utopian. It's not idealistic. There's this ugly underside to it too, which has always been the ugly underside of America. No matter what immigrant race you are coming from, or immigrant or country you're coming from, the Irish suffered through it, the Italians suffered through it, the Latinos suffered through it. Now we're seeing to a degree the Muslims suffer, or people of Middle East birth suffering through it as they come into this country. It's happening. It constantly happens in this country, and we're a nation of immigrants, but still we do this whole thing.
Well,
because
they try to
people
turn it around, but they rib each other by
Yes.
calling immigrant.
Yes, exactly.
And they tease each other with the same way that they're being teased. So we feel such an empathy
Yes.
for them.
And they make fun of Puerto Rico, because she says let it sink back in the ocean, because she knows it's not a great place to come from. It's really tough and terrible, and they at least have like something here, and that's the difference.
I mean, that song is so current today, and my guess is it will always be so.
Yeah.
Because you know, we are a nation of immigrants, and that is something we have in common. And one of the other things all of us immigrants have in common is resenting the next batch of immigrants.
Quote unquote.
And that's what's so great about America, because you have one side celebrating this country and the possibilities, and the other side, which is the masculine side, being very bitter and cynical and, kind of condescending about it. And so this is the struggle that still happens now. 30% Latinos voted for Trump. That's huge to our people, because there are people who are mad that these immigrants are coming over from their own proper countries. So this stuff still resonates now, this division within the Latino community as well. And so to see it highlighted in a song so perfectly and so vibrant, such a vibrant song.
It's one of the most amazing things about this film, how relevant and how much it resonates even now. And it is because of that universal theme behind it. Right. Hate breeds hate. And that's really what it comes down to at the end of the film. And it's something we should all be aware of in this day and age and in the political climate we're in.
Yeah.
Well, it's really tough, because I remember when I first saw the film, and probably it was in the 80s at some point, and I watched it and I went, okay, I know we're still struggling with these things today, but we've grown too. That was sort of my thought in high school.
Wasn't that nice?
Yeah. And now I look at it again and I go, oh shit.
Yeah.
Maybe we haven't.
Have we evolved at all?
Yeah, and things have changed. The way we deal with these things have changed. And it was really interesting. One of the things that the film does really well that's very subtle is that there is no question that what we would call today the institutional bias is against the Puerto Ricans, because you have the police that are clearly saying, and you have the experience of what we hear about the society that are saying, we don't like you.
Right.
But they don't do it in such a way that turns the Jets into bad guys. And the Jets do things that are bad.
Right, because they're both against the police.
Right. Is that it still manages to be kind to the Jets, which you see like in the Officer Krupke song, is they still manage to go like, oh, we should have sympathy for these people, even though they're doing terrible things.
Right.
And that's a really complicated line to walk. And you don't see a lot of films capable of doing this. Usually once you have racism, you go, okay, those guys are the bad guys. Right. And particularly with what we're dealing with today, where we have a very divided country and we have certainly racist things going on. And then we also have a huge portion of the country attacking a huge portion of the country and calling them racist. The subtlety that exists within this film is the subtlety that we need to start to embrace ourselves, because this is going to be, there are a lot of gray areas in here and we can't get through them with black and white labels.
There's another little tidbit. Tonight was originally only for the quintet, the Tonight Ensemble. And when One Hand, One Heart was originally the song for the balcony scene. They decided that it was too somber a song for their love song on,
they needed something sexy.
They needed something else. So they said, well, why don't we grab that Tonight motif from the quintet and turn it into a song? And that became the famous balcony scene.
Tonight, tonight, all began tonight. I saw you and the world went away. Tonight, tonight, there's only you tonight. What you are, what you do, what you say.
Today, all day, I had the feeling a miracle would happen. I know now I was right. For here you are, and what was just a world is a start tonight.
Let's talk about what I can only call their wedding night.
Yeah.
And it's constructed
It's so precious,
beautiful
isn't it?
because it happens almost accidentally. They're in the dress shop and they start just,
They're playing.
I'm going to bring you home to my mom. This is my mom. And they point to a mannequin with a dress and they start improvising with that. And there's a tuxedo and that's dad. And as suddenly she's wearing a bridal veil and he's wearing, and then suddenly we're like, oh, this is our wedding. And they discover it together. And we go into this beautiful song.
Right.
It's one of the most charming moments of the whole movie, I think.
With this ring, I thee wed.
With this ring, I thee wed.
Make of our hands one hand, make of our hearts one heart, make of our vows one last vow. Only death will part us now.
Day after day, one life. Now it begins,
Now we start one hand, one heart. Even death won't part us
You really get to see, like I was saying, the potential of who they are and who they are together and what it can mean
Yeah.
in the most pure
Absolutely.
way. Just the beauty of that moment just sets up the tragedy at the end to be even worse.
Supposed to be.
Well, and it's pure love in very much the way that Romeo and Juliet is pure love.
Yeah.
You know?
But I don't think they have a scene like this in the play with Romeo and Juliet. I mean, they have the hand.
They're married by the friar.
Yeah, but this is more to me more powerful scene
agree.
of
I couldn't agree more.
of the marriage. And what you bring up, Steve, is what I think is the most powerful moment in that. It's playful, and then they discover, oh my God, we do feel this way for real. Like the play strips, like the playfulness strips away, and the reality of their feelings for each other becomes so powerful in that moment, so real, so that they turn together to the light and accept.
Beautifully staged in that moment. It's just we are completely on board with this journey when we are playing along with them like kids, and then when they turn. We all feel, if you have ever fallen in love before
at a young age,
you can't watch that scene and not feel anything. Like it's just one of those most beautiful moments. It's also a testament to the two of them as actors because they didn't really like each other.
Oh, really?
No. So that's one of those stories. I think Natalie Wood was dating Warren Beatty at the time, right? And she wanted him to be Tony, and so she was pissed that he didn't get it.
No,
they would be polite to each other on set and say good morning and good evening.
I think I don't think they necessarily hated each other or anything like that. She was just very aloof. I mean, she was a huge movie star.
Yeah, true.
Doing this movie with all these unknown dancer kids. So I think in the Hollywood vein of that time, she was kind of doing her own thing. She
But
was
it was a
sequestered
true
off. But
testament to their performance in that scene and in all of the scenes. You are completely in love with them being in love.
Those are some of the most interesting stories because Sophia Loren
happens a lot, yeah.
right? Because Sophia Loren and Charlton Heston hated each other in El Cid. In fact, they would never. He never looks at her, never looks at her in the entire film, and she is always in a separate section of she's always in a different area where they're together. Even when they're together, she's always doing something like that. And so it's on purpose because they absolutely hated working with each other.
I'm still back on young Warren Beatty as Tony.
Yeah,
I was just still thinking about
Isn't that bizarre to think about?
totally changed the
thanks.
movie. But he's handsome and charismatic
but
and romantic
he
and
ain't
sexy.
street. He ain't street.
Robert Wise
Tony's a
wanted
little bit
Elvis
street.
Presley for the role.
Can you imagine?
Stop talking.
That would just hurt.
One hand, one
I mean, it's 61.
That's fair.
That would sell tickets.
They wouldn't have dubbed his voice. They dubbed just about everybody else's. I didn't realize they dubbed Rita Moreno. That she's dubbed on
Some of it.
On
A Boy Like That.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's kind of tragic to me.
Yeah.
Because as an actress, she's an incredible singer. She's
She's an EGOT.
Yeah, I know, right?
She's our second EGOT, by the way, the podcast. We didn't mention we did Mike Nichols as an EGOT.
Oh, that's right. He's an EGOT as well.
Yeah, I read something that said she won her EGOTs in the shortest time frame of anybody.
Wow. Not a surprise.
Yeah.
By the way, for those of you listening who don't know what an EGOT is, look it up. It's awesome.
It's amazing. I have real mixed feelings about A Boy Like That being dubbed because she says herself that she couldn't hit the low notes. I think it starts on an F. It is very, very low. And the range of that song is so high. I mean, she's belting probably E's or F's by the end, and legit, that is hard to do. And she talks about it that she really, in the moment of that song, what that song is and where she is in a place of character, she was growling that song, just full of rage. And you see it in her performance. You see it on her face. You see it in her body language, but it didn't match the tone of the rest of the piece. And so they did end up dubbing her for that. And you can see that there's a bit of a mismatch.
Yeah, the
in
way
the performance
her
and
face
what you're
doesn't
hearing.
match the sound coming out of her mouth. Betty Wand did the vocal for that, and I guess, it's understandable with Rita. She is a wonderful singer. Yeah. So to have someone dub the entire song in one of the most powerful moments in the movie, you probably do miss something there. If you listen to some of the actual audio tracks of them singing, like
Riff.
Yeah.
It's really different.
And better, in my opinion.
Because I don't love the guy singing Riff.
No, I don't either.
Particularly.
Well, he only dubbed the Jet song. The rest of it is Russ
the rest is
Tamblyn.
him.
Yeah, just the Jet song.
It's the opening Jet song is the only thing that got dubbed of him.
Because it didn't sound like that guy was great.
Right.
He sounded a little flat to me.
I agree, and I also think you hear Riff do it, and Russ Tamblyn. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, there were certain assumptions back in the day about what you would do, and the assumption today is you try to have the real person do it, and you bend over backwards to have it be the real person. That's sort of the assumption we work on today, and it seems like the assumption back then was kind of the opposite.
It was for sure. I mean, you have somebody like Shirley Jones. Yes, of course, she can she can sing her own stuff, or Julie Andrews. That was the standard. If you're gonna sing your own stuff, that's who you need. Or John Raitt, somebody like that. There wasn't an appetite or a tolerance for a non-trained singing voice. And it's not that these people are not good singers, but Natalie Wood is not trained. And this is a level of music that is more operatic rather than a popular song.
Right.
So there's a certain quality that they were really going for that I understand you just couldn't get.
And it was the days before any kind of auto-tune. Right. So I think we just have different technological advancements that allow for it to be a little more forgiving for people who don't have a great voice.
This film commended it, right? You don't see this in the Gene Kelly films and the Fred Astaire films. They're singing their stuff,
yeah.
But they're not. This is an epic music. This is what you would consider an epic.
There's no tritones in
Right.
in a-
Overtures and intermissions are for epics. This is what we see in epics. So this is an epic musical, and the only epic musical I think ever, in my opinion. And so,
Well, Les
logically,
Mis. Les Mis.
You
Wow.
mean well? I mean on screen. I don't mean. Please, I can't even with that one.
I just mean the musical. The musical is
The
an
musical
epic.
on stage.
The story.
But I'm
that's
talking
an epic
about
story.
a musical on screen. To me, that's an epic because an epic as a genre of film. You know,
Okay,
so
I
like,
see what you're
like
saying.
Lawrence of Arabia and Ben-Hur.
Sure.
This belongs in the epic conversation.
George Chakiris.
Yeah.
Yes,
He's the other standout performance for me
and
in the
non-Latino.
show.
Another non-Latino.
He's Greek.
He's Greek.
Does he get the
And
honor?
still alive.
Does
Or
he
was
get the
still alive.
honorary Latino cred?
Oh my God! Of course he does. Bernardo
yeah,
is
you'd be a
so
fool not to give
well
it to him. He's so good.
He's so good, and he's dark. Like they didn't shy away from that. They made him dark, and I think it works.
Well,
they made him brown. They made him brown, is what I mean, and I like
Yeah.
that. I like that he
You're okay with
conveys
brown
that.
makeup?
Yeah, with that, sure. I have no problem. They did it with Wallach in Magnificent Seven. They made him brown Mexican. I mean, that's what it's more the stereotype Latino. Like that's the thing that people don't talk about enough about this film. They really come close to being stereotypically racist, right? The comments about them all living in a room together, the comments about them shining shoes, all that during America.
And that was
But
a delicate balance. They had to change things in order to toe that line.
Exactly, and it works. At no point is it offensive. At no point is it disrespectful. At no point is it racist. It's conveying what was the reality of that time and is still now for a lot of Mexicans who come into this country, have to live together, have to do, they're doing the terrible jobs, working 3 jobs at the same time, and they're all living together because we have that sense of community within us. Like it's a really big thing. I dated a girl recently who was Latina. We stopped dating, but like when we were dating, she hated the fact that I consider my friends family. She's like, that's not your family. That's not your blood. And I'm like, no, these are my friends. That's my blood. And she's like, nope, that's not how it is. And her family is her blood. That's the thing. More valuable than friends. And that is such a foreign concept to me. But for her, that's what it is. And what you see in the film, what they talk about, that sense of unity is not from a gang sense. It's from a culture sense. And that's what I see is the difference between the Jets and the Sharks too.
And you see that exactly. That was just what I was going to say. You
Yeah.
see that with George Chakiris, and you see that what he is doing far more than what Riff is doing is he is a representative of this community.
Yes.
In a way that it's not that Riff doesn't care about the Jets, but what he's trying to do and what Bernardo is trying to do is really different. And Chakiris, from the first shot where he's in front of that red wall and hits it with a fist,
Yes.
you're like, who is this guy? I cannot stop watching him.
He's so regal, and his dance technique is just flawless.
Yes.
I mean, he does have a Gene Kelly quality about him because while he's doing all these balletic moves, he's exuding strength. And to your point about him versus Riff as the leaders, you can see Bernardo as he's trying to be an ambassador.
Yes.
He's trying to lead. He's really, truly trying to be a leader and to lead his people and to protect his family and his people and to really create a better life. Where it seems like Riff is more just a little renegade.
Yeah, that's why I think Tony is the correlative rival to Bernardo than Riff.
Yeah.
Tony, because of his regalness, his age, his look. He's a better looking man than Russ Tamblyn. He has a classic leading man look. So which is why it's funny that he thinks he's going to fight Tony when in fact it's.
Well, there's a funny tidbit about Chakiris. They found him because he was playing Riff in the London production of West Side Story.
Oh, great. Wow.
Yeah, so during the Rumble scene, he was actually helping Russ Tamblyn. They're like, "What did I do here?" And he's like, "Oh, you do this move." And
that's amazing. That's so cool.
It's incredible.
I think to me that the big contrast between the Jets and the Sharks and between Riff and Bernardo is that the Jets are young men who are lost. They don't know what their place is. They don't know who they're supposed to be.
You're right.
They don't have the right parenting. They don't fit into the society. And so they are strutting and trying to find their place and using the Jets as to be, this is our place.
Yeah.
The Sharks are young men on a journey to a new country. They know where they are and they know where they're trying to do.
And they're there by choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're trying to defend their position. The Jets, there are threats to them, and they must defend. They know exactly why they are defending it. And that gives that contrast between Riff and Bernardo. What Riff is doing, it's not that he's taking what he's doing seriously, but what Bernardo's doing is serious.
Well, that's the
in a
difference
different way.
Just between a champion and a hungry challenger, right? They're the the Sharks are the hungry challengers. Just like you brought away at the beginning, Milena, you talked about their dancing. The Jets are elevated. They're high above because they're in the position of power at that time. The Sharks are hungrier. They're closer to the ground because that's where they are. They're the hungry challenger. And so that's the difference. Riff is more relaxed, kind of. He's been in power for a while, whereas Bernardo is really, like you said, he's trying to lead his people. It's a whole, and they never sing about coming from broken homes. They sing about coming from a broken country. That's a difference.
Well, I think that actually points it out. The Jets have no family, but they have a country.
Yes.
The Sharks have family, but no country.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a great point.
That's something to just bring up about this score in general. Bernstein does such an amazing job of putting melodies in your head before you arrive at the song. So at the dance, the cha-cha is Maria. It's the melody of Maria. And all through this score, he works with leitmotifs. He basically, Bernstein owns two intervals. So the tritone interval is an augmented fourth. If you imagine a C,
which he stole from Wagner.
But he brought it into modern current music in such an amazing way. The tritone is an augmented fourth. So if you imagine on a keyboard a C, the F sharp is the augmented fourth, and
Maria
right
is the tritone,
and it's also cool, boy. It's that same motif that he uses throughout the whole score. It's in the prologue. It's all over the place, and he also owns another interval, which is the minor seventh for Somewhere, which
there's a place for us.
So when you're teaching intervals to kids,
it's good to have a composer and a singer on the podcast.
That's right.
It works out. When
you're teaching intervals to kids, you reference two songs from West Side Story to help them learn those intervals. And something else, Milena and I, we met in New York on the New York City subway, and we fell in love over the fact that we both love this film more than pretty much anything else. And then came online these new subway trains.
They started replacing all the subway cars about probably 10 years ago. And I kid you not, when the train starts, it's like a mechanical thing. The train goes,
it does.
That is the noise.
Wow.
It's a mechanical thing on the train.
So we're on the platform, and every time we hear a train go by, we're like, that's nice.
Which is, I guess, similar to the whistle, too, isn't it?
Because the whistle is the tritone.
Oh, the whistle's the tritone.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Well, one of the ones that I noticed, too, is that Tonight ends with those sort of unfinished chords.
That quintet is so brilliant. It's basically it's bimodal. There's
two modes. So your left hand is in the key of E, and your right hand is in the key of C. So there's bitonality. It's really modal more than completely different keys. But
the Sharks and the Jets. That's all minor.
The Jets are gonna have their day tonight. The Jets are gonna have their way tonight. The Puerto Ricans grumble, fair fight. But if they start a rumble, we'll rumble them right.
And the tonight is all in major, and they're happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And then right before the end, right at the climax of the song, the tonight melody is going over the top, and the guys at the bottom, they move into a major. We're gonna get our way tonight, and the whole piece opens wide.
Today the minutes seem like days, the hours go so slow.
And they're all singing their final note. Everybody's in major, but then the orchestra comes back in, bump, 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 back in minor again.
We're gonna rock it tonight.
Just a quick question. The South Park movie. Have you guys seen the South Park movie?
Yes.
Yeah, a long time ago.
That 4-part is very reminiscent of Tonight, right? When they're talking about the revolution.
That's the way it goes. Hey, more your shackles on. Don't be tired. I want to love it, it starts. Let it shine.
always thought of Tonight whenever I saw that, and I was.
Well, it's very operatic.
Yes.
It has its roots in opera.
Yeah.
And that's another really interesting thing about Leonard Bernstein is that he had very grand aspirations for himself as a composer. He wanted to be the great American operatic composer. So he always thought of musicals as being somewhat less than. It's popular.
Oh, yeah.
Like you could either be popular or you could be great and be taken seriously. And so he had an interesting relationship with this musical because it was the most popular thing that he wrote, and yet he didn't feel like people really took it seriously in his lifetime. I mean,
and he actually really he didn't want to call it an opera.
Yeah.
And whenever anyone said it was operatic, he would really take umbrage to that. He called it
because he didn't think it was good enough to be opera. He didn't think it elevated to the level to be called opera.
So he called it a musical comedy tragedy.
Can you believe that?
Custodial engineer.
This is why, to some degree, people shouldn't be allowed to talk about their own stuff.
Yeah.
And this is a great example of why this transcends pretty much every other score out there. Because a 5-year-old can sing pretty much every single song in this show. The melodies are soaring and simple, and not to say simplistic. There's a lot of complexity to the melody, but they're so easy to grab onto. And then you have this harmonic and rhythmic world underneath it that's unlike anything else. It has so much sophistication, and yet you can dance to it, and you can. And
I can't.
There's not a wasted song. There's not a wasted song. There's not one song that you listen like in just about every Sondheim musical. There's one or two songs I'm like, but there's nothing in here that you cannot listen to.
Exactly.
Sing along, know all the lyrics to, and follow through as you listen to.
We had that experience watching it again the other night.
Yeah.
We're like, can you believe?
And it's just
there's
another
yet
brilliant
another
melody.
one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not easy to dance to. Like the mambo, the dance at the gym,
Yeah, mambo's
the
great.
rumble, the rumble is completely choreographed.
Yeah.
Every second of it, all the pauses, and
Well, and there's like 56 counts, and
exactly,
it's
tons
really
of counts.
complicated.
And so for their playback, they had they obviously don't have all the orchestra recordings of everything yet. They had an on-set pianist. Forgive me if I'm stealing your thunder on any of this. We were going to talk about it.
It's all your thunder.
So yeah, they had an on-set pianist who would play the score for the dancers to dance to, but also she was counting out beats. And for that rumble, a lot of it's not music, it's percussive.
Yeah.
And so she's banging on the piano, counting the beats, and the dancers are trying to not only do this incredibly difficult, violent choreography, but stay on the beat, hit their counts, be in the moment as actors, and do it exactly the same every time because they did a million angles and it's got to cut. And it's even more difficult than just your normal editing because you're cutting to a really strict time signature.
Yeah, you can't change time at all, which is something you do all the time in editing. And for a lot of this that they're shooting it, particularly for the prologue and for Cool, they're on real locations, so they're dancing on concrete.
Oh God, yeah.
Which is brutal on the body. And in Cool, where they're underneath that parking garage or whatever it is it's like 100 and something degrees in there, and they're doing Cool forever. And his knees are blowing out, and I think Arab had pneumonia and passed out at one point.
That's right.
It is brutal on these people. I mean, look, I'll celebrate all the great athletes in the world, but people do not celebrate dancers enough. Like what they do is off the charts, right up there with any of the greatest athletes in the world. And you watch what these young dancers did is amazing.
After they knew they rapped Cool and they weren't going to have to dance anymore, they took their knee pads and burned them outside Jerome Robbins' office.
I will say one last thing.
Yes.
And for me, because I love the film so damn much, the only problem I have is that when Bernardo gets killed, there are no seconds or thirds that step up and take center focus, right? Because you have in Cool, you have, what's his name? He's second in command.
Ice.
You have Ice do the whole thing with Arab.
Yeah.
All you have is Chino. That's all you really have. The other guys that are all on this roof don't get these kind of lines, don't get their own separate, like, what do we do now? Who leads us now? We get, the Latinos, we get kind of pushed to the background, which is
I hadn't
unfortunate.
thought about that. That's a really good point.
As watching it, for me, up until Bernardo gets killed, I am so in love with the movie, and I still love the movie, obviously, to the end, because it's one of my favorite films ever. But it bothers me a little bit that we get pushed to the back of the line because Tony kind of takes center, Maria takes center stage, and Anita takes center, which is okay because women, that's all, you deserve the parts, deserve to have the leads, and no problem. But I have an issue that the guys just get pushed to the background because it wasn't that, there should have been, because there's a couple of those dudes when you see in America that are pretty hardcore dudes, and they would have been, and they're just definitely a correlative ice. On the other side, which was the widow's peak with the curly hair, he is correlative ice, and he could have had a say. So I wonder if they'd ever thought to even write something for them as a reaction to what happened. Because why don't they go out? Who coordinates the Tony death? Is it just Chino? Do they all want him dead? How do they figure this out? I think that's the gaping hole in this in the musical, that there's not something there about for them.
It's a great point. I mean, one thing I know from a play that I did in college, it's hard to do things perfectly even.
Well, of course.
It's really hard. But no, the point is really right.
So many different ways in the film where we could have easily hated either one of those sides, but there's so many smart little moments in it. Even in the prologue, for instance, there's a moment where the Jets first start walking, and there's a little girl in the middle of a chalk circle. Yeah. And they don't walk over her. They walk around her.
Right.
And the basketball, they steal it, but then they give it back. And so it does this push and pull with the viewer saying, you're going to hate these people and you're going to like these people. Yeah. And it's just so smart how they established, shaking hands with one of the sharks and then pushing him. And the escalation of that, how they introduced it. And throughout the film, even with Officer Krupke, is a great way to establish heart, that these kids are coming from broken homes. They're trying to find a way forward. Same thing with America for the Sharks.
And the society's not letting them go forward.
Correct.
Right. Is that the society is continually to keep them from becoming who they need to become.
Right. There's that line, Doc yells at them in his shop and says, why do you guys make this such a terrible world? And he's like, we found it that way, Doc. I can't remember.
No, Action says, we didn't make it, Doc.
We didn't make it, Doc.
Which is a great pushback.
It's a great line. Yeah. But using Krupke and America as the two major establishing songs for the two groups does so much. Yeah. There's a lot of differences between the play and the film, which we may be talking about, but that was one of the biggest changes that both David and I agree made the movie so successful, because Krupke used to be after the Rumble.
Yeah.
So that was in the and so
it's
was
still
I
done
feel
on stage
and Cool was before, right?
That's right.
I feel Pretty was later too.
Wow.
After the Rumble, because on stage, no musical had ever gone this dark before.
Right.
They were really concerned that audiences, after Riff and Bernardo are killed, they were afraid the audiences were not going to recover. They're not used to seeing that kind of progression.
Right.
So that's why they put those songs there. And Cool was at the top where Krupke is now. Apparently, Stephen Sondheim had always lobbied for that
Sondheim
change.
always hated it, yeah.
And so Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins acquiesced, gave it to him, and it makes so much more sense. It's so much more successful on a storytelling level and character level as well.
Well, and Cool becomes this whole other thing.
Cool's awesome.
Because you can't have all that. I mean, I've never seen this. I mean, I've seen the stage play, but never thought about this until watching the movie. After I found that out, is that all of the anger and intensity and fear and violence that's in Cool wouldn't exist if you did it before.
Boy, crazy boy, stay loose, boy. Use it, buzz it, easy does it. Turn off the juice, boy. Just play it cool, boy. Real cool.
It's really story through dance in such a compelling way.
Yeah, and conveying what happens when you're young, when you're angry, when you're trying to bust out and there's no place to go, to see it through a white experience. It's so great to watch this film now in retrospect because you see that now and you see the anger in Cool that is just about like, I just want to get out. I want to bust. I want to go, and you remember that. And that's why I think what you guys talked about earlier is very universal because these are the things you feel.
And Steve, to that point, actually Somewhere is another example of this being done where in the Broadway production, Somewhere is sung by a random girl. And instead, in the film, we have our two romantic leads singing the song to each other, as a way of looking forward after such a death on both of their sides.
And in the stage play, it's Somewhere is actually an entire ballet that happens after the Rumble, where it's our chance as an audience to take in what has happened and the weight and the more emotional side rather than the violent side of what has happened. And there wasn't really a great way to translate that onto film.
But it's about centralizing your characters, centralizing the emotional through line for the piece. And by having them sing that song, it becomes so much more powerful.
Time and place for us. Hold my hand and we're halfway there. Hold my hand and I'll take you there. Somehow, someday, somewhere.
What's great, though, about giving Somewhere to them, too, is the way it comes back at the end of the movie, where she sings it to him as a final goodbye. It's so much more powerful because now she's talking about being together possibly in heaven or possibly, in another, after they've both passed on.
Well, and that song is so unresolved.
Yes.
When you hear it, that it leaves you with this haunting sort of sound at the end. I don't know what chord we're in there, but it's something very like it sticks with you.
Yeah.
And doesn't resolve, of course, at the end of the film.
Right.
Until the credits, I think. In the credits, we finally get something that makes it go, okay, this is a little bit okay.
And Tony is what happens after. What happens when you grow up? What happens when you have to actually take a job and you can't be running the streets anymore? You have to actually provide, be a good partner. If you're going to find someone to marry, those kinds of things. You can't hang out on the street corner anymore.
He's ready to become an adult.
Yes.
Which is what we hope all of these guys will do, is to become like Tony, except I got real problems with Tony. I mean, what?
Let's talk about that, Steve.
We'll get in.
We'll get there. Yeah.
I want to ask you what your Tony issue is. Now that we've talked about Tony, tell me what your issue with Tony.
Here's what I'll say.
Because we can't just laud the film. I like these conversations where we kind of have a little difference of opinion. Tell me.
So my reaction to West Side Story is very much my reaction to Romeo and Juliet, which is that it makes me angry.
Ooh.
I get angry. And I'm particularly angry at Romeo and Tony because they fuck it up. Because
but that's the
leave it to the guys.
I understand.
We don't have a
it's
great
story.
movie without Tony fucking it up.
I didn't say it's not a great movie.
Okay.
I do think it's a great movie, but they make me angry because Tony does this amazing thing, which is that he actually stops the Rumble. So we have agreed that the Jets and the Sharks are going to fight. We meet at Doc's Candy Shop. They're having a war council, which, by the way, is an actual thing that really happened in gangs of that time. They would have a war council, and they're agreeing on weapons, and it's escalating. It's going to be fists. No, it's going to be rubber hoses. No, it's going to be pipes. No, it's going to be knives, guns.
Sticks, knives, guns.
And then Tony comes in, and he says, no, we're going to have your best fighter, our best fighter, fists. That's it. And they agree. And that is heroic. That is an amazing thing.
But he's influenced by Maria to do that, right? His love of Maria,
but he
love at first sight of Maria is what influences him.
Well, and I think in falling in love with Maria, his hatred for the Sharks has disappeared.
Right.
And then he goes back to Maria, and Maria says, no, you have to stop the whole thing entirely. So now I'm a little angry at Maria. And then Tony goes off to do this thing that is now impossible. He already was a hero, and then he shows up, and he interferes with a knife fight, causing Riff to die, his best friend.
Right.
And both Riff's death and Mercutio's death in Romeo and Juliet pisses me off.
Wow.
Oh yeah, because Mercutio is my favorite character in Romeo and Juliet. Riff maybe is not my favorite character in West Side Story because it's Anita.
Right.
But I'm like, this tragedy is your fault because you are dumb and young and stupid. And then he kills Bernardo, just as Romeo kills Tybalt.
Right.
So now you have added to your stupidity with murder. And so, yes, no, I am angry at Tony. I am angry at the two of them. They make foolish choices. That I'm angry at Maria because Maria says Anita to the candy store.
Have you ever been in a high pressure situation? You're
Yeah.
not always thinking straight sometimes.
So
he went down there and that's it, just try to stop it happening. He got pushed. He is a former gang member. That trigger got, the switch got flipped.
I understand what
and
happened.
So he did what he did, and he. But I don't agree with you at all. I think he's going from pure places. He just gets caught up because these people won't let him go, and he's not strong enough yet because he's not fully out of the life yet, and he has love for Riff and all that for their relationship. They're essentially brothers, and so when all that happens with Riff, he loses it as he would, as anybody would, I would imagine.
Your description of the character is absolutely correct. I agree with everything you said. The character makes perfect sense. That is why he does what he does.
He's a good man.
Well, but this is why we have bad things happen in the world because people make foolish choices because they are too emotionally involved in their moments. Is that the reality is, and the reality is with Romeo and Juliet, that they are stupid. The reason that they die is because they're dumb.
Mercutio's a fool. I don't think. I think Mercutio's a fool, and I think that's why he died. He's a blowhard fool, and I think that there's a difference
Mercutio
here.
was doing fine till Romeo comes along and gets in the way.
No, but Riff is different than Mercutio, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, Mercutio is much cooler than Riff.
What? No, you're insane. All right, go ahead.
Okay.
I now want to go through every Greek tragedy with you and have you explain to me why you are mad at the characters.
Why aren't you mad at Cain? Aren't you mad at Cain through the whole film? He messes his whole fucking life up.
Well, sure.
Oh, are you mad at him at the level that you are at Tony?
Because they're more complicated. They're different characters. Look, I think the thing to me is maybe I'm just distrustful of young love. I mean, maybe that's what we get to.
Yikes.
Is that look, everybody fell in love in high school, and maybe not everybody, many people fall in love in high school, and many people think that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at that person and you go, this is it. This is going to be it for life. And you know what? It's fucking not.
Well, no, of
and most of us do not cause people to die,
Steve,
because of our.
Come over here and lay down on this couch. Let's talk this through.
That's the beauty, but that's the beauty of young love. It feels cataclysmic. It feels like world ending.
Right. But when
because
you're in the
still
middle,
discovering
when
it.
you're in the center of gang violence, maybe you should just keep it on the down low for like an hour.
Have you ever lived in a poverty place? Like it's tough. That's a tough situation.
They try to keep it on the down low. They're trying to sneak away.
They are.
And it's when Maria gets detained by the cop that she asks Anita to go.
Yeah, that's brutal.
It's one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the whole movie, and you have another moment where it could have all been fine.
Right.
Yeah.
If the Jets had just listened and taken the message, but they're in that heated moment too. They're in the same place Tony was when he killed Bernardo.
That's the sign of a great tragedy.
Oh,
How
yeah.
many times can you say, if only this?
Yeah.
If only this had happened instead of that. The more of those that you can add to your story, the better the story is.
Yeah,
and
but
this has a ton of those.
You got believable and organic.
That's right.
Exactly. And what we see there with what you brought up is essentially a rape in a musical. It's essentially a rape.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh,
Her look.
yeah.
When she turns around and she regains her womanhood and says, "Don't you touch me." It's so powerful. And Rita Moreno is so amazing in this film.
She is the all-out star in the film for
and
me.
Latina, damn it.
She is, and she's considered also Anita's considered the most successful character by the book writer, who said, what was his quote? It was something like, she's by far the most successful character because she shows up, kicks ass, and leaves.
Right.
He didn't say kicks ass, but that's basically what he meant.
And
yeah.
her going to Doc's store is this heroic moment because literally the man she loves has been killed by the man that Maria loves, and Maria has asked her to go to enemy territory to save the man who killed the man you love. And she does it. That is more heroic than anything else in the film.
Which is her duet. A Boy Like That and I Have a Love.
All right. Now you know.
And you still don't know.
He is one of them! No, Anita. Yes!
A boy like that would kill your brother. Forget that boy and find another. One of your own kind. Stick to your own kind. A boy like that will give you sorrow. You'll meet another boy tomorrow. One of your own kind. Stick to your own kind.
Like, it's one of, my God, I cry just thinking about it. It's one of the most gorgeous duets written, and it does something that a lot of duets in musical theater don't do. It's a conflict song.
Right.
You hear a lot of duets that are love songs or people singing all about the same thing, and now you take a verse, now I take a verse.
Right.
This duet is two cataclysmically opposed points of view, and through the song is when the two women find the common ground of love and loss and hope for the future.
When love comes so strong, there is no right or wrong. Your love is your
that Anita gets the confidence to go to the store, even though she knows she's walking into the lion's den.
And then what she walks into is by far, I think, the darkest moment in the play or in the movie. Even though we've seen, two deaths, but
Maybe to the end.
The end is probably the darkest, but yes, this is
because this is destruction of innocence. The end is the destruction of innocence.
That kind of gang rape scene is really
absolutely.
It's
shocking.
really bad.
It's shocking.
You're right.
It's shocking.
But she understands this.
the highest moment of hate.
Yeah.
I think.
But this is a possibility in that life because she is the wife of a gang member. This is a possibility. This is the fact that you could be touched by this violence is possible. Maria's destruction of her innocence is, I think, the darkest moment because she is our heroine, and she is by the end destroyed because she says, "Now I have hate."
Yeah,
which is very difficult. That's an emotional moment, man. It's so powerful.
And the music is doing so much of the work for you.
Yeah.
And there, even in the attempted rape scene, they did something brilliantly, which was to choreograph it.
Yeah.
But how do you? It's not going to be a song.
Right.
They brilliantly put America on the jukebox. So when she walks in, the jukebox is playing America. So that tips us into the musicality of the moment. It gets us into the dance. Obviously, the music escalates from there, but it's organic. And that's another reason why it's so scary.
Yeah.
We're not comforted by the fact that we have a musical score and that we're in a song and like, oh, this is Haydn, this is a song. No, it feels real.
Yeah.
Well, and in a way, the choreography, choreography is symbolic. And just as the choreography of fight scenes is symbolic of actual violence.
Right.
The choreography of the rape, it's symbolic of actual rape.
Yeah.
Like there's part of me that goes, oh no, she was raped.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's not just that she was almost raped. And it's funny too, because you bring up America, is that in a weird way, the other parallel piece of music in that scene to me is Krupke. Because Krupke is the scene in which we have sympathy for these guys. And we go, oh, it's not their fault. It's society's fault.
Yeah.
What were they supposed to do? And then you see this scene where those same funny, acrobatic, playful kids are gang raping someone in the way of war, of that's who they've become. And all of that, oh, it's not their fault, goes out the window because these are the real people committing a real crime. And it is so, and you're with Doc. When Doc walks in, it is just horrible. Yeah.
Hey, they're deprived on account they're depraved.
By the way, I literally wrote down that line in my notes. Sondheim wrote that line, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the Sondheim line.
But do you think the conflict one is that duet that they have that you mentioned, is this foreshadowing what Sondheim is going to do many, many times in a number of his musicals going forward? You see that you definitely see it in Sweeney with Mrs. Lovett and Sweeney,
well, this musical introduced a whole nother level of the potential of musical theater and movie musicals in general, and Sondheim ran with it. You know, this was really the kernels of what he later went on to do, which is to have story and character drive music.
Yeah.
Rather than the more Richard Rodgers, Oscar Hammerstein approach, was to have the music driving the lyric or advancing the character. So yeah, it really was his learning ground for doing just that.
Yeah.
I think that Sondheim felt that Bernstein was one of his greatest teachers. And in this moment in time where they were developing this together, they sat down at the piano together and wrote Something's Coming. Sondheim was right next to Bernstein, and actually a lot of his musical influences in that as well. He was just such a gifted composer on top of being a great lyricist. He could actually sit down and play it for Bernstein, and Bernstein would think, okay, let's take it here, let's take it there. So the collaboration, the amount of talent among the two of them was just extraordinary. So Something's Coming, I think, was one of the final songs they actually wrote. Oh, wow. They were already in previews, or maybe they were still in rehearsal, but it came pretty late in the process.
They did alter some of the lyrics coming from stage to screen for a couple of reasons, some because they brought in the guys, but also for clearance. There were a lot of edgy lyrics that they were trying to put through. Some came from the stage play, some they were wanting to use in the film, and they couldn't get it cleared by the studio.
Sondheim wanted this to be the first musical ever to have the F-bomb in it. And so G, Officer Krupp, G, F-U is what he wanted, but instead it was Krupp you. But in the film, even some of the dialogue, it was supposed to be sperm to worm is how it's said in the musical, in the Broadway show, but instead it was birth to earth. There was actually supposed to be a final song for Maria.
Oh, wow.
Her whole final speech was actually considered dummy lyrics that Arthur Lawrence wrote for them to adapt into, a lyric and a song.
He expected Leonard Bernstein to musicalize that moment. That was in the game plan.
And Leonard could never find it. And it's because he's brilliant, because it's actually something you learn is when you're spotting for songs, it's sometimes more powerful to not have a song and to let it just stand on its own as a scene.
How many bullets are left, Chino? Enough for you? And you? All of you! You all killed him, and my brother, and Riff. Not with bullets and guns, with hate. Well, I can kill too, because now I have hate. How many can I kill, Chino? How many? And still have one bullet left for me.
Kind of takes us back into the real world. If it was another song, another number at the end, we're still in musical land, but the grounded elements of that story really resonate all the more because there's no singing.
It's much like the top of the potential rape scene where they don't give you the comfort of music there. This is one of those moments where no, this shit's real. Well, sorry guys.
and you juxtapose that with the ending of America. America is a vibrant, so it ends with it. It's like exciting, even though we're talking about this really difficult existence in this country. For them, West Side's the ending is a downer, which does not happen in musicals. It does not happen, and to see that ending that way was so powerful and groundbreaking. Even Sweeney Todd ends on a little because everyone gets their comeuppance. Whereas in this, it is very much unresolved, very much like the tragedy, obviously, of Shakespeare, but it's still ballsy to do that for a musical in the 60s when the country may not have been ready for something like that.
And I think you brought this up earlier. The fact that Maria lives makes it all the more heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Of course, she was originally supposed to die.
Right.
And people thought on the team maybe that was too dark, but it actually is darker that she lives.
I think so too.
Because who knows what she ends up as? She probably just ends up with this incredible hole in her heart for the rest of her life.
Yeah, because Romeo and Juliet is all wrapped up in a bow at the end. It's a dark black bow covered in cobwebs, but it's still wrapped up in a bow. Whereas this is unfinished in a sense because she has this life that she's going to go off to, and it's interesting too because. We know how Romeo and Juliet ends. Most people, I think, seen West Side Story, know this isn't going to go well. They probably know it's based on Romeo and Juliet. Yeah. And certainly, as you see it again and again, there's people think that we see things to be surprised and that we see things to see the unexpected. But in fact, we watch things over and over and over again because there's something that draws us into the inevitable tragedy in a way. And as you draw close to the end, you know Tony's going to die. You know Gino's out there with the gun.
Gino's got that damn gun.
He's got the gun. Tony was calling Gino, come kill me, come kill me.
Yeah.
After, by the way, Anita's betrayal, which is horrific. I mean, it's what she just went through something horrific, and now she does something terrible, and it's completely understandable, totally motivatable, and that he's calling to be killed, and he's running to Maria, and whether you've seen it once or no times or 1,000 times, you're like, here it comes. Well, and that's the inevitability is something that we are drawn to in this strange way.
The greatest tragedies are surprising but inevitable.
Yeah.
And that's the great combination that it gives you.
And that's what's so great about their relationship, right? That's what's because it's so realistic throughout the whole film. Like you just buy it. These two actors, Bamer, is it? Yeah, and Natalie have just this connection, right? And he never did anything close to this ever again as an actor. But there was something so powerful in their connection because he's older, she's younger. There's this innocence. She brings him back to this innocence. She gives him hope of what that he'd been looking for since the beginning of the movie when he's like, something's out there, I don't know where it is, but when he's singing all that, she is that something, and then their future becomes that something after One Hand, One Heart, which is one of the most beautiful songs ever written and pure about love. And then eventually what goes on in their mistakes, their tragic mistakes, then Anita betrayal. And so the ending when it happens is so much more poignant because he does stay alive to say some final words to her. And then she sings to him and it's Chino.
There's so much potential in them. You know, the potential of their relationship is transcendent for not only them, but maybe for their cultures too, if they could have worked it out.
Yeah, right.
But I think the fact that Maria lives at the end just makes this an even better allegory as to why we are still here today, still dealing with this, because people do live on. Everybody doesn't die.
Right.
People do live on. And what do you do after this moment?
Right.
And we see firsthand that destruction of innocence, and we go, yep, that's why we're still here wrestling with all the same crap.
Yeah.
Well, and as dark as the end of the film is, there is one moment we haven't talked about that is hopeful. And to me, it's an amazing moment. It's very small, it's the pallbearer moment, which is that the jets go to pick up Tony.
Oh, God, it's a heartbreaking moment.
And they can't, and there are 3 jets that come up, and it's so beautifully constructed.
Yeah.
And they start to lift him, and they struggle a little, and the sharks come and help.
Right.
And there's this moment of conflict, and then there's this moment of acceptance.
Yeah.
And the sharks and the jets carry Tony's body out together. That's hopeful.
And they go back to the God's eye view.
Yeah.
And she walks alone now with the black scar. So she is the collateral damage that is unfortunate for the possibility of a new dawn, a new peace between the gangs.
But I think some of the jets and some of the sharks are not going to fight again.
Right. Yes. Okay.
I don't know that all of the jets and all the sharks aren't going to fight again.
Which is true.
But some of them might learn a lesson.
Right.
You know,
that's the hope you walk away with.
West Side Story, it has brilliant music, it's brilliant story, it's brilliant writing, it's brilliant choreography. Together, they all transcend all those individual genres. They have come together in such a beautifully cohesive and expressive way that you can't help but be drawn in. And if you just sit and listen to that overture before you even see anything stylized, you're in. And all the elements are working at such a high level that there's so much to learn, and I could watch it a million times and just keep learning.
What she said. I would say, it's worthwhile watching this film. It's also worthwhile sitting down and just listening to the score. Just listen to these songs, and it takes you to a different world, like really no other musical can.
What do you think, John?
It's at the same time a classic movie from its time period and at the same time timeless. Like, I think that's what's so amazing about the film. It does such a great job of walking the line of two different things constantly the whole time as you're watching it. And I no longer consider it just a musical. Like, it's an epic film. And if you have not seen it or haven't seen it for a long time, after you listen to us talk about it, go back and revisit it with the amazing information that you've heard today from our two guests and see what you didn't see before and pick up and appreciate it even more. And that's what's so great about this film is it's like any classic good film, you appreciate it every time differently when you watch it. Every single time you watch it, you get something different out of it. And I think that's what's so amazing about it. And it's heartbreaking and moving and everything you could possibly want. And if you go on the journey, the reward is so worth it, no matter how painful it is.
There's so many things to see in this film. You listen to, as you say, with the overture, that music before and still today, there is nothing like it. And then you see the beautiful cinematography and you move into the city in a way that you've never seen it before. And then you see the dance, and it's a style of dance that you've never seen before. And you see these young performers, and you can see in songs like America and songs like Cool, the power and the energy and the pain and the passion that they're putting into it. And you've never seen anything like that before. And then you listen to the lyrics and the words and the humor and the complexity and the emotion that comes through those lyrics. And that's nothing you've seen before. And all of those things, which any one of them would be enough to make a great film, they come together towards this bigger purpose, which is to tell this story, which, as we're all reacting to today, that story hits just as hard today as it did in 1961. And so, this is a movie that you do need to keep watching. I'm not just saying you should watch it. I'm saying you need to watch it. And we have to keep watching it because it's a movie which, beyond all that beautiful artistry that goes into it, tells us something about ourselves and our world that we have to keep reminding ourselves of. That the conflicts that are coming, they're inside of us, and that we are responsible for figuring out how to solve them. And if we don't, we get to the end of West Side Story. And that seems to be happening over and over again until we say stop. Okay.
That was great.
Thank you, guys. This was so much fun to be here.
So much fun to be with you today. Thank you for having us on.
Well, it's really a pleasure having you. David, Milena, if people wanted to reach you.
Oh, yeah. I'm at Milena Govich on all the socials. That's MilenaGovich.
I'm at David Cornue, DavidCornue.
It's nice to have unusual names. You just get to have your name. John, where can they reach you?
You guys can always find me at The Rocha Says, ROCHA. You see all the shows I'm hosting, co-hosting, like this one, and all the shows I'm a guest on.
So all sorts of great stuff to find John on. As always, we want to hear your comments on West Side Story or any of the movies we talk about. We want to hear your suggestions of other films you'd like us to do. You can always reach us on Facebook at the Cine-Files. That's CINE-FILES. You can reach me on Twitter at SR Morris. Of course, we want you to review us on iTunes. We've gotten amazing reviews from you so far. We want more of them because we are greedy like that. And I want to, again, thank David Cornue and Milena Govich for coming on to talk about West Side Story. I don't know about you, but I learned so much.
Oh, so much. I'm going back and watching it this afternoon again.
Wow. And I hope you watch it too. And that's it for this week. We will see you next time on the Cine-Files.